The Wouwermühle wasn't just a building, it was a living, breathing entity, its history etched into every beam and stone. Situated deep within the Bavarian Alps, the ancient watermill had stood sentinel for centuries. Its weathered wooden frame groaned tales of bygone eras, of farmers bringing their grain to be ground, of families seeking shelter during fierce storms, of lovers meeting in secret by the rushing stream that powered its massive wheel. Now, it belonged to Brunhilde, a woman as sturdy and grounded as the mill itself. Brunhilde, a woman carved from the very landscape she inhabited, had inherited the Wouwermühle from her grandfather. Her life was simple, measured by the rhythmic churning of the mill wheel and the scent of freshly ground flour that permeated the air. She wasn't a woman of grand ambitions or desires. Her happiness lay in the quiet routine, the satisfaction of honest labor, and the deep connection she felt to the land. Her only companion in this solitary existence was Liesel, a scruffy terrier mix with eyes that held an almost human intelligence. Liesel was more than just a dog. She was Brunhilde's shadow, her confidant, the furry heart that warmed her often lonely existence. They were an unlikely pair, the stoic woman and the perpetually energetic dog, but their bond was unbreakable. Liesel seemed to understand Brunhilde's moods, offering a comforting nudge or a playful bark as needed. One blustery autumn evening, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, Liesel began to behave strangely. The wind howled through the mountain passes, rattling the old mill's windows and whistling through the gaps in its wooden walls. Leaves, ablaze with fiery hues of red and gold, danced in the wind, creating a swirling kaleidoscope of color. Liesel, heavily pregnant and nearing her time, usually sought refuge by the warm oven, content to nap away the evening. But tonight, she was restless. She paced nervously, her tail tucked low, whining and scratching incessantly at the heavy oak door. Brunhilde, her brow furrowed with concern, abandoned her preparations for a simple supper of bread and cheese. She followed Liesel outside, her boots crunching on the gravel path. The dog led her, with a clear sense of purpose, to the base of an ancient weeping willow that stood sentinel near the rushing stream. The willow's branches, heavy with moisture, drooped mournfully, almost touching the ground. It was a place of shadow and whispers, a place where the wind seemed to carry secrets from the past. It was there, amidst the gnarled roots of the old willow, that Liesel suddenly stopped and began to pant heavily, signaling the imminent arrival of her pups. The birth was beginning, under the mournful gaze of the weeping willow and the watchful eyes of Brunhilde. The first few days were a haze of exhaustion and wonder. Brunhilde, fueled by strong coffee and an unwavering sense of responsibility, tended to Liesel and her pups with tireless devotion. She cleaned, fed, and comforted, her calloused hands surprisingly gentle as she handled the tiny creatures. The Wouwermühle was filled with the soft, milky scent of new life, a welcome change from the usual aroma of flour and wood. But amidst the flurry of activity, Brunhilde couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was deeply wrong. Liesel's cries continued, unabated. They were no longer the cries of a laboring animal, but something more profound, more heartbreaking. They were cries of distress, of profound sorrow, as if she were mourning a loss that Brunhilde couldn't comprehend. The sound echoed through the mill, a constant lament that tugged at Brunhilde's heart. Adding to Brunhilde's unease was the unnerving silence of the puppies themselves. Newborn puppies were typically noisy creatures, filling the air with tiny squeaks, whimpers, and grunts as they suckled and slept. But Liesel's pups were different. They latched onto their mother with a fierce determination, suckling greedily, but they made no sound. They slept soundly, their tiny bodies twitching in their dreams, but they remained eerily silent. The lack of any vocalization from the pups created a disturbing atmosphere, a stillness that felt unnatural and unsettling. Brunhilde tried to rationalize it. Perhaps they were simply quiet pups, she thought, or perhaps Liesel's constant crying was masking their own faint noises. But the feeling of unease persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Driven by her growing anxiety, Brunhilde decided to seek the wisdom of Frau Schmidt, the village elder. Frau Schmidt was a repository of local knowledge, a woman whose life experience was as vast and intricate as the mountain range that surrounded them. She was known for her herbal remedies, her understanding of animal behavior, and her deep connection to the ancient lore of the region. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, each line telling a story of hardship and resilience. Brunhilde bundled Liesel's pups into a warm basket and walked the winding path to Frau Schmidt's cottage. The old woman, her eyes sharp and observant despite her age, listened intently as Brunhilde recounted the details of Liesel's birthing and the strange silence of the pups. Frau Schmidt stroked her chin thoughtfully, her gaze distant as she considered Brunhilde's words. "The weeping willow," she croaked, her voice raspy with age, "is a place of sorrow, a place where the veil between worlds is thin. It is said that the trees can absorb the pain and suffering of those who seek solace beneath their branches. Perhaps," she continued, her eyes narrowing, "the pups have inherited its melancholy. Perhaps they are simply burdened by the sadness of that place." She paused, her gaze returning to Brunhilde. "But silence in newborns, that is not natural. It is a sign of something amiss, a disruption in the natural order. Keep a close watch, Brunhilde. Something is not right in the Wörmühle." Frau Schmidt's words hung in the air, heavy with foreboding, confirming Brunhilde's deepest fears. The weight of Dr. Gruber's words crashed down on Brunhilde, stealing the air from her lungs. Cyanide poisoning. The diagnosis hung in the small, sterile office like a death knell, its implications sending a shiver of horror down her spine. Her mind struggled to grasp the enormity of the situation. Poisoned? How? Why? Who would do such a thing? Dr. Gruber, seeing the shock etched on Brunhilde's face, laid a comforting hand on her arm. "I know this is difficult to hear, Brunhilde," he said gently, "but we need to act quickly. If the other pups have been exposed, we may still be able to save them." He explained that cyanide disrupted the body's ability to use oxygen, leading to rapid cellular death. The bluish tinge Brunhilde had noticed on the pups' gums was a sign of oxygen deprivation, a clear indicator of cyanide poisoning. He administered a series of injections to the remaining pups, hoping to counteract the effects of the poisonous drive. Gruber worked. Brunhilde's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. Where could the cyanide have come from? She kept a clean and orderly household. She used no pesticides or herbicides in her garden. She couldn't imagine any scenario in which the pups could have accidentally ingested such a deadly substance. "Doctor," Brunhilde said, her voice trembling, "is there any way to tell how they were poisoned? Was it ingested, or—" Dr. Gruber paused, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Cyanide has a distinctive smell," he said thoughtfully. "A faint scent of bitter almonds. Did you notice anything unusual in the whelping box, or anywhere near the pups?" The mention of almonds triggered a memory, a fleeting sensation that had brushed against her awareness in the past few days. A subtle, almost imperceptible scent, like almonds, but not quite. She had dismissed it as her imagination, or perhaps the scent of some of the herbs she used in her cooking. But now, in light of Dr. Gruber's words, the memory took on a sinister significance. "Yes," Brunhilde whispered, her eyes widening. "Yes, I think I did notice something, a faint almond-like scent, near the weeping willow. But it was so faint, I didn't think anything of it." The weeping willow. The place where Liesel had given birth. The place that Frau Schmidt had described as a place of sorrow, where the veil between worlds was thin. A chill ran down Brunhilde's spine. The scent of almonds near the weeping willow. It all pointed to a deliberate act of malice, a calculated attempt to harm Liesel and her pups' drive. Gruber continued to monitor the pups. Brunhilde left the clinic, her mind consumed by a mixture of grief, fear, and a burning desire for justice. The peaceful tranquility of her life at the Wörmühle had been shattered, replaced by a chilling sense of betrayal. Someone in her community, someone she likely knew, had poisoned her beloved Liesel's puppies. And she wouldn't rest until she uncovered the truth. The scent of bitter almonds had become the scent of vengeance. The news of the poisoned puppies spread through the small Bavarian village like wildfire, igniting a mixture of shock, outrage, and suspicion. In a place where trust and neighborly goodwill were cornerstones of the community, such a malicious act felt like a profound betrayal. Herr Muller, the village constable, a stout man with a walrus mustache and a reputation for unwavering fairness, launched an official investigation. He questioned every resident, his keen eyes searching for any hint of deception or guilt. He examined the Wörmühle and its surroundings, meticulously combing the area for any clues that might lead him to the perpetrator, but the investigation proved frustratingly slow. No one admitted to any knowledge of the poisoning, and there were no obvious signs of forced entry or tampering. The villagers, though outwardly cooperative, seemed guarded, their answers carefully measured. The close-knit community had suddenly become a web of secrets and unspoken suspicions. Suspicion inevitably fell on several individuals. Old Herr Schmidt, the grumpy and reclusive son of Frau Schmidt, was a prime suspect. He had a long-standing feud with Brunhilde over a disputed property line, and he was known for his volatile temper and his penchant for holding grudges. Some whispered that he had been seen lurking near the Warmule in the days leading up to the poisoning. Another suspect was a mysterious newcomer, a gaunt man with shifty eyes who had recently arrived in the village. He kept to himself, avoiding contact with the other residents, and his presence aroused unease and distrust. He had been seen walking in the woods near the Warmule, and his secretive behavior fueled speculation that he might be involved in the poisoning. Brunhilde, while cooperating fully with Herr Muller's investigation, found herself increasingly frustrated by the lack of progress. She couldn't shake the feeling that the answers she sought lay hidden within the Warmule itself, buried beneath layers of secrets and unspoken truths. She decided to conduct her own investigation, drawing on her intimate knowledge of the mill and its surroundings. She spent hours combing the woods, her eyes scanning the ground for any trace of the cyanide. She examined the weeping willow, meticulously searching for any discarded containers or suspicious markings. She questioned her neighbors, probing for any overlooked details or inconsistencies in their stories. As she delved deeper into the investigation, Brunhilde began to uncover a network of hidden tensions and resentments within the village. Long-standing feuds, simmering jealousies, and unspoken grievances bubbled to the surface, revealing a darker side to the seemingly idyllic community. She realized that the poisoning of Liesel's pups was not simply a random act of cruelty, but a symptom of a deeper malaise that had festered beneath the surface for years. The weight of the investigation took its toll on Brunhilde. Sleepless nights and mounting anxiety etched lines of worry on her face. The Warmule, once her sanctuary, now felt like a prison, haunted by the memory of the poisoned pup and the chilling knowledge that a ruthless killer was lurking in the shadows. But she refused to give up. Driven by her love for Liesel and her determination to bring the perpetrator to justice, she pressed on, determined to unmask the darkness that had crept into her peaceful village. The shadows were growing deeper, but Brunhilde was determined to find the light. Days bled into weeks, the investigation casting a long, oppressive shadow over the village. The initial outrage began to wane, replaced by a weary resignation. Herr Muller continued his inquiries, but the trail had gone cold. The villagers, eager to put the unsettling incident behind them, retreated into their routines, their faces etched with a silent discomfort. Brunhilde, however, remained relentless. The image of the convulsing puppy, the bitter almond scent, the mournful cries of Liesel, these were the fuel that drove her forward. She revisited the scene of the crime countless times, retracing her steps, searching for any clue that she might have overlooked. One crisp afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the valley, Brunhilde decided to take Liesel for a walk in the woods. She hoped that a change of scenery might provide a fresh perspective, a spark of inspiration. Liesel, still grieving the loss of her pup, remained close to Brunhilde's side, her tail tucked low, her eyes filled with a lingering sadness. As they walked, Brunhilde let Liesel lead the way, trusting the dog's instincts to guide her. They followed a familiar path, winding through the towering pines and across a babbling brook. Suddenly, Liesel stopped, her body tense, her nose twitching. She began to sniff the ground intently, her focus unwavering. Brunhilde watched with growing curiosity as Liesel moved towards a towering oak tree, one of the oldest and largest trees in the forest. The oak stood on the edge of Brunhilde's property, marking the boundary between her land and that of her neighbor, Herr Schmidt. Liesel began to dig frantically at the base of the oak, her paws scattering leaves and dirt. Brunhilde rushed to her side, her heart pounding with anticipation. What had Liesel found? What secrets lay buried beneath the ancient tree? After several minutes of furious digging, Liesel unearthed something. It was small, cylindrical, and made of glass. Brunhilde carefully reached down and picked it up. It was a vial, empty, but the faint, unmistakable scent of bitter almonds clung to its surface, the same scent she had detected near the weeping willow. A wave of nausea washed over Brunhilde as the pieces of the puzzle finally fell into place. The oak tree, the property line, the scent of bitter almonds, it all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. The poison had come from Herr Schmidt's property. Armed with this damning evidence, Brunhilde confronted Herr Schmidt at his farm. The old man initially denied any involvement, his face contorted with indignation. He accused Brunhilde of trespassing and of fabricating evidence to frame him. But Brunhilde stood firm, her voice unwavering. She presented the vial, recounting the details of Liesel's discovery. She described the faint almond scent, the oak tree on the property line. She laid bare the circumstantial evidence that pointed so convincingly to his guilt. Faced with Brunhilde's unwavering resolve and the irrefutable evidence, Herr Schmidt's resistance crumbled. His shoulders slumped, his face flushed with shame and remorse. He confessed to poisoning the pups. His voice, barely a whisper, revealed a story of misplaced anger and unintended consequences. He claimed that he had been attempting to eradicate a pack of foxes that had been raiding his chickens, and he had carelessly placed the poison too close to Brunhilde's property. He never intended to harm Liesel's pups, he insisted. It was a tragic accident. Brunhilde listened in stunned silence, her emotions a tangled mess of anger, grief, and disbelief. The truth was far more mundane, far less sinister than she had imagined. But the end result was the same. An innocent pup had died, and Liesel had been forced to endure unimaginable pain. The oak tree, silent witness to the tragedy, seemed to sigh in the wind, as if lamenting the human frailty that had led to such a senseless act. Brunhilde listened in stunned silence, her emotions a tangled mess of anger, grief, and disbelief. The truth was far more mundane, far less sinister than she had imagined. But the end result was the same. An innocent pup had died, and Liesel had been forced to endure unimaginable pain. The oak tree, silent witness to the tragedy, seemed to sigh in the wind, as if lamenting the human frailty that had led to such a senseless act. Brunhilde listened in stunned silence, her emotions a tangled mess of anger, grief, and disbelief. The truth was far more mundane, far less sinister than she had imagined. But the end result was the same. An innocent pup had died, and Liesel had been forced to endure unimaginable pain. The oak tree, silent witness to the tragedy, seemed to sigh in the wind, as if lamenting the human frailty that had led to such a senseless act. The revelation of Herr Schmidt's involvement sent ripples of shock and disappointment through the village. The community, already fractured by suspicion, now grappled with the reality that one of their own had been responsible for such a cruel act. Herr Muller, his face grim, arrested Herr Schmidt, who offered no resistance. The court proceedings were swift and somber. While Herr Schmidt maintained that the poisoning was unintentional, the evidence against him was overwhelming. He was found guilty of animal cruelty and reckless endangerment, and sentenced to a period of community service and a hefty fine. For Brunhilde, the legal proceedings brought a measure of closure, but the emotional scars remained. The grief over the lost pup lingered, a constant ache in her heart. The knowledge that her neighbor, someone she had known for years, had been responsible for such a tragedy shattered her sense of trust and security. Liesel, too, carried the weight of the ordeal. Although the surviving pups recovered fully under Drive Gruber's care, Liesel's mournful cries gradually subsided, replaced by a quiet sadness that was palpable to Brunhilde. She showered Liesel with extra affection, trying to soothe her pain and reassure her that she was loved. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Brunhilde found herself re-evaluating her life at the Wörmühle. The idyllic existence she had once cherished had been irrevocably tainted by the events of the past few months. The sense of isolation that had always been a part of her life now felt more pronounced, more oppressive. Yet, despite the pain and the disillusionment, Brunhilde found herself unable to leave the Wörmühle. It was more than just a building, it was a part of her, woven into the fabric of her being. It was the legacy of her grandfather, the place where she had spent her entire life. And despite the darkness that had descended upon it, she knew that it still held the potential for healing and renewal. As the seasons changed, the Wörmühle began to heal alongside Brunhilde and Liesel. The surviving pups grew into healthy, playful dogs, their yaps and barks filling the mill with a renewed sense of life. Brunhilde found solace in their presence, their innocent joy a balm to her wounded soul. She spent her days tending to the mill, grinding grain, and baking bread, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of her work. In time, Brunhilde began to reconnect with the community, forging new bonds of friendship and understanding. She learned that even in the darkest of times, there was still room for compassion and forgiveness. She even found a way to forgive Herr Schmidt, recognizing that his actions, though reprehensible, were ultimately the result of human fallibility. The Wörmühle continued to stand strong, its creaking bones whispering tales of sorrow and resilience. The memory of the poisoned pup and the scent of bitter almonds would forever be etched into its history, a reminder of the darkness that had once threatened to consume it. But the Wouwermule was also a testament to the enduring power of hope, the capacity for healing, and the unwavering strength of the human spirit. The echoes of the past would always resonate within its walls, but they would be joined by new echoes, of laughter, of love, and of the enduring bond between a woman and her dog, who had weathered the storm and emerged stronger on the other side. The Wouwermule stood as a beacon of resilience in the Bavarian Alps, its wheel turning steadily, a symbol of life's enduring cycle of sorrow and renewal.